Welcome to episode 2 of Latitude's podcast series, focusing on why Americans are seeking dual citizenship options abroad. On this episode, we have Latitude's managing director, Christopher Willis, as a guest on Frank Curzio's podcast, Wall Street Unplugged, the #1 most listened to financial podcast on iTunes. The two explore the best countries, the cost, and step-by-step procedure for Americans exploring dual citizenship options abroad. Enjoy.
Well, you've been working in the immigration industry for 25 years, which includes helping people get dual citizenship. Let's start, since you're a new guest. How did you get into this industry? Because right now, I would think that business is booming for you.
Yeah, we've actually had a big intake of interest in people looking at having a second residence or citizenship. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why in a bit. But, I started off in this industry, 25 years ago, before it was really an industry like the way it is today. So it was a question of, identifying the programs, identifying the need of why people were looking for second residence or citizenship. In fact, I started off in London in the UK, where there's a big concentration of Australians, Canadians, New Zealanders, South Africans, etc., who are either looking to stay in the UK or bring a partner back to their home country. So that's really where it started. And then it evolved into doing a lot of Canadian inbound immigration, and then finally getting into all the different residence and citizenship programs that are available around the world.
Now, I said I would think business is booming, not just for the coronavirus, that we have the most cases in the U.S., so maybe that might worry people, but we're seeing unrest in major cities where a lot of wealthy people are moving out. They're thinking, they're very scared right now. And I say this with Zoom technology. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Just being in the right industry at the right time, that was the best way to communicate during COVID. But is it that simple? I mean, what are some of the main reasons Americans are applying for a second citizenship?
Well, I think what's happened now, Frank, is there's been a big reality check. People realize, I'm an American citizen. I've got my ability to live and work anywhere in the U.S. But what happens if I want to go to other parts of the world? Whether it's for leisure or for business purposes, or even just as an insurance policy, because as you say, the States is struggling a bit with COVID, and there's some other factors, civil unrest, there's concerns about the economy. There's a variety of reasons why people were saying, well, look, maybe I can be better off somewhere else. And, so look at other factors such as, what's the healthcare system like? What's the security like? How did this new country manage COVID? Because some countries have managed it better than others. And that's a factor a lot of people are looking at right now. But for an American, you're used to having the ability to travel the world. But what's happened now with a lot of these travel bans, the European Union being one, Canada being another, so two major destinations that Americans are used to traveling to, are basically saying the border's closed, unless you have status to enter the country. In other words, you're a Canadian citizen or a European citizen. And so the having that second citizenship can open up many more opportunities than being reliant purely on being an American.
So is that right? If I have dual citizenship, so if I have a passport in Europe or one of the countries in Europe and the United States, even though they have a travel ban, I would be able to travel back and forth right now?
Yeah, I mean, you'd still be subject to quarantine requirements, but you can at least enter the country. And I'll give you an example, because a lot of the popular citizenship by investment programs take place in the Caribbean. And you may have been reading that a lot of the Caribbean countries actually shut their borders, saying we don't want anybody in, we don't want anybody out, because we want to be able to contain the pandemic. And we can do that if they close their borders. So, many of the countries were saying, look, as of this date, we're shutting the borders. So either you get in or you get out. You make that choice, right? So, because, places like the Cayman Islands, their borders have been shut since the beginning of April. So it's a very different phenomenon to go through when you're on, say, a smaller island. Then you got to say, well, okay, if I'm going to be in that place, can I conduct my business? For example, what the communication links like and that type of thing. But if you're wanting, let's say you wanted to go to Antigua in the Caribbean, unless you're a citizen of Antigua, they wouldn't have let you in. So you couldn't come in as an American, as a visitor. You'd have to actually have citizenship to be qualified to enter the country. In normal times, no problem. Americans, Canadians, Brits, they come and go. But with the pandemic, they've restricted it only to citizens. So if you don't have that, the privilege of having that second citizenship, you can't get in.
Wow, it's very interesting. So take me through the process. Say, Chris, I call you, I say, look, I want to do citizenship. And I know the rules are going to be different for each country, but let's talk about the similarities between them. What do I need to do? Because when I'm researching this, it seems like I have to invest in something, either real estate bonds or make a typical donation to the country. I mean, do I have to do these things? What's the process if I called you and said, hey, I want to do citizenship, I want passport in the Caribbean?
Yeah, well, there's two things we have to distinguish. You have what's called residency by investment, and you have citizenship by investment. And the very quick distinction is residency means you have permission to stay indefinitely, but you don't qualify for a passport unless you meet the citizenship requirements. So we see that as being a popular option in places like Europe, and the Cayman Islands and the Caribbean. So that's one angle. The second angle is the citizenship, which is a direct application for citizenship. So you don't have to meet any residency requirements. Once you're successful, you're issued with a naturalization certificate, and with that, you can apply for a passport. So, the first thing we have to do is understand the client's needs. Saying, okay, do you need residency or do you need citizenship? Are you going to be spending time in that country, or are you just looking for the travel document? So once we can, whittle that down and decide, okay, this is the best course of action, then we could look at which program is going to be the most suitable. So in the Caribbean, they're similar but very different. There's 5 programs that currently offer a citizenship by investment program. And you touched on it that you typically have 2 options. One is you make a donation to the government. So it's essentially a transaction. You make this donation, you pass all of the due diligence and source of wealth, source of funds checks, etc., and then you would be granted your economic citizenship. But for some people, and more so for Americans, there is an option to buy real estate. So you can actually incorporate a lifestyle component as well. So, let's say, you're in New York, you're in Boston, you're in Seattle, it's winter, it's cold, and you say, look, I want to have my 2 weeks in the Caribbean every February to break up the winter. You could say, well, why don't we buy a villa in the Caribbean? And as a benefit of purchasing that villa, we can also qualify for economic citizenship. So some people are okay cutting a check and walking away. Others would rather invest in something and have an asset. So you have the 2 different options there. Certainly, if you do go down the real estate route, you're getting into a second negotiation with a developer. So that you'd have to go through the whole real estate purchase process for them. But then you can use that purchase to qualify. So again, it depends on what the client's after. And in some cases, there'll be a larger family or a group of friends who all pitch in, invest the minimum amount in the real estate, but use 4 or 5 of them to buy a larger villa, which they use amongst themselves.
Now, I don't know how much you could talk about this. I'm just curious because a lot of politics are involved here. And the donation part, I mean, is there certain nations where, is there a limit to that donation? Because I can see someone who's extremely, rich, a hedge fund manager saying, hey, I'll donate $10 million to build a library wherever and get approval. I'm not too sure if you could talk about that, but it seems to me that if it's based on a donation, the more money you give, the more likely it is for that country to accept you. I mean, is there kind of truth to that? Or is that, again, I don't want to speculate or conspiracy theories, but I just is this a level playing field for anybody or is it definitely skewed towards the extremely wealthy?
No, I mean, some of them will have minimum net worth requirements, which, could be as low as 2 million, so it's not excluding a big chunk of the population, it's certainly of your listeners. But it's very clear in terms of what the minimum is, and it's not at the 10 million levels. I mean, there are other programs where that can come into play in Europe, for example, but in the Caribbean, the least expensive is 100,000 US. So, once you add on your due diligence costs, your professional fees, your passport fees, etc., a single person is still going to be under 150,000 US to get a Caribbean citizenship in less than about 3 months. So, it's very affordable for many people. And the fact that the processing is quite quick, it does give you a very quick solution. It does give you that sort of plan B, that insurance policy, whatever you want to call it. Because, everyone sort of talks about, the what if, but that what if is right now. And that's why I was talking about the reality check a bit earlier, that people are realizing, hey, I didn't plan for this. This isn't part of my portfolio or my strategy. So let's tick this box. Let's get the second citizenship so we have another option for myself and my family if things get worse. And that's where I think there's a little bit of a uneasiness about the ability for everything to recover quickly in the United States. And that's where people are getting nervous and want to make sure they have this contingency.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense. Now talk about the countries. I could be wrong on this because I always research everyone before I interview them. Of course, I research the industry. What are the most popular countries? Is it 25 in total that you could do this, or is it more than that? I thought I saw number 25 someplace. So what are some of the most popular countries that you're getting right now in terms of people asking for passport dual citizenship?
Well, I mean, in the Caribbean, you've got 5. And this is just for the citizenship program. So you have St. Kitts and Nevis, you have Antigua Barbuda, Dominica, St. Lucia, and Grenada. So, and as I mentioned earlier, they're similar but different, but they all have a donation option and they all have a real estate option. So then we start looking at, which countries can you visit as a citizen of your new country. So, for example, in Grenada, they have a visa-free treaty with China. So if it was important for you to travel frequently to China and not worry about visas, etc., then you would have visa-free privileges if you were a citizen of Grenada. So when people start looking at the number of countries you can go to versus the quality of the countries you can go to, that can be a determining factor. Because some people may say it's really important, I can get access to South Africa, and then when we do a study, we see, okay, which of these countries will give you visa-free privileges to South Africa? And there's only one, which is Antigua. So, then that could be a reason why they would look at one program over another. But I lived in St. Kitts and Nevis for 3 years and Grenada for a year, so I know that region very well. And part of my role is I also represent an industry body in the Caribbean as well. So there's the Caribbean I'm extremely familiar with, and it's a well-established industry now. Some of the programs have been around since 1984, others are only a few years old. So I think what happened is, once other countries in the Eastern Caribbean saw that St. Kitts and Nevis was doing so well, to the point, at its peak, it was nearly 40% of its GDP was coming in through this program. So there's a heavy reliance, on some of these programs. Just keep in mind, tourism is the main revenue generator, and with COVID, their season was wiped out. So they're having, luckily they have resources and reserves from this program to help deal with the loss of revenue from COVID. So there's so many different knock-on effects and benefits that come from this, especially when you're talking about smaller states who have limited resources that come as it relates to foreign direct investment.
No, and I can see just with the coronavirus, it's amazing how something like this just puts more things into action. Even when it comes to a company like Amazon, where you think everybody was shopping online, and now you realize how many people weren't, with all the boxes going to their house and how much things are easy. But when you're forced to do something like this, to rethink different things, I can see why business is booming for you right now. Now, we talked about the benefits. What are some of the drawbacks? Because when I look at this, we have to worry about double taxation. Laws by 2 different nations. What are some of the negatives of doing this?
Well, within these Caribbean countries, you're only taxed on income you would generate in that country. So, and obviously, as American citizens, you're subject to FATCA, and you're taxed on your citizenship. So that doesn't really change things from a tax perspective, unless people are renouncing and going through that process. But that's just a very small percentage of people. With the however, there's also some tax residence programs, in Anguilla and in Cayman Islands, where they have a very attractive tax structures that for non-Americans, could be a solution for some people. But in terms of the drawbacks, one is if people are buying real estate, they have to hold it for 5 years before they could sell it on. So for some people, they're saying, well, what's the value going to be in 5 years? There's going to be more products on the market. And, am I going to lose on this investment? And also it's the management of it after that 5 years. Because most of them tend to be in hotel development. So if you had a share of ownership, or you bought title deed real estate in a development, what's my returns going to be if I put it in the hotel rental pool? Now, with COVID, for example, when the hotels have had to close, people are getting no returns. So there's a risk there, like you would have with any investment. But keep in mind, from a purely investment point of view, this certainly isn't the best out there, but the benefit is you're getting the second citizenship, right? So for those who don't want to just cut a check and walk away with a donation, if they did want to invest in something, there's going to be some risk associated with that because of some of the unknowns. And then apart from that, it's a relatively straightforward, it's an established industry. So there's not a lot of downsides. Clients will have to go through strict due diligence, from the point of, as I mentioned earlier, demonstrating source of wealth, source of funds, going through any criminality, etc., to make sure that they're not going to be a reputational risk to the country or a threat to the security of the country. So that's part of the process. And again, as long as they can document all their background, then there's no reason for them not to be approved.
No, great stuff. So I would think that you've been in the Caribbean, you've worked with the Caribbean, you work with Canada, of course. I would think it's easy easier if you live in America to get dual citizenship. What about people outside trying to get dual citizenship for America? Is that just like an impossible task? Is it much different? I could picture that being much more stringent, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the immigration policy, so, many of the different categories have been suspended, but there are a few that are still open. It's not easy. I'm not going to lie to you getting into the U.S. In fact, a lot of the consular offices are only opened a few weeks ago, so it's not an easy process. And, the current administration is very much about, attracting the right type of immigrants. So a lot of the business programs, I'm sure you've heard of the EB-5, which had a lot of popularity, but that's now changed a little bit, so it's less attractive. And then you've got the E2, which is also quite attractive for entrepreneurs or people looking to enter on a temporary visa or what we call a non-immigrant visa, because the attraction there is that they're not then subject to FATCA because they're only a temporary resident as opposed to a green card holder or a permanent resident. So then they're only taxed on the income they generate in the U.S. So for some people, that's a better solution, for their overall structure. But you know what? The U.S. is always going to, have an attraction for people, irrespective of, COVID or whatever else is going on in the country. It's still very much, an attractive destination, just like, the UK is, just like other countries are as well. So, but as it relates to the United States, again, it's a residency program to get in. But what we're also seeing from some Americans is interest in some of the European programs. Ireland is one, there's a big affinity between the United States and Ireland. And they will say, well, look, if I want to get status somewhere else, I like Ireland because it's English speaking. I like Ireland because they have good beer and I can play golf, right? There's a lot of reasons why people, they may have some heritage in the country as well. Others are looking, there's citizenship programs in Cyprus and Malta, which cost a lot more. I mean, Cyprus, you're looking €2.5 million. And for Malta, they're just rebranding it at the moment, but you're going to be looking at about €1.2 million really for an application to go through. And that'll take about 18 months, where Cyprus is about 6 to 8 months. So it comes down a little bit to you get what you pay for, right? So if you want the cheap and cheerful, quick ones, it's the Caribbean. If you want the more involved, longer process, which let's call it a higher value European passport, then it's going to cost you more and take a little bit longer. So, like most things in life, as I mentioned, you get what you pay for, but there's different options on the table for people who want to have the second citizenship or residency. And this is why it's key that when we speak to people, we get a sense of their motivations, their time scale, their budget, and then we can guide them to see what the best program would be.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask you about the cost and everything. So for Caribbean, how much did you say the Caribbean was? Because I know you said $1.5 million or more for some European nations, but the Caribbean, how much lower is it?
Yeah, no, it starts at $100,000 US, so it's very affordable.
Definitely.
All of these will have, you have due diligence fees, professional fees, passport fees, etc. But certainly south of $150,000 US for a single person. The larger the family unit, the higher the price. It'll go up proportionally. Again, some countries, they're priced more appropriately for families than single people and vice versa. But the other thing that's interesting here, Frank, is that some of the countries have a greater expansion in the definition of a dependent. So, as opposed to the standard, husband, wife, 2 kids, some of the programs will include the parents. If the parents are over 55, they can be included on the application, or in some cases even siblings. So if you have a brother or sister and they're unmarried and have no kids, then they could also, be included. So if someone says to me, this is my family structure and I want to include as many people as possible, then that will dictate which program might be more suitable over another. So, there's, as I mentioned before, they're similar but different. So they've all got these different tweaks that we can assess against the client's needs.
No, that's great. So I guess the last question here. So somebody, say if I wanted to go through this process and I called you and I just filled out all the paperwork, how long does it take? And is it much? I would think it's much longer now compared to pre-COVID, right? But what's the process and how long does it take to actually get this finished? Is it like a year, 2 years, a few months?
No, it's actually relatively quick. In the Caribbean, it's around about 3 months. And in fact, they were very good in terms of dealing with COVID because typically everything has to go in hard copy. Okay, so you collect everything, you get the hard copy form signed, all the supporting documents, and that gets couriered to the processing unit. However, they were then accepting soft copies due to COVID and able to at least open a file and start processing if there was a couple of documents that were maybe outstanding that the applicant couldn't get due to COVID. For example, a police certificate, because government departments were closed because of COVID. So they've been very, very responsive and prepared to deal with it. And so they didn't really miss a beat when it came to processing. So from that side of it, we were very encouraged. When you look at the European programs, they do take a bit longer. Ireland, you're looking at least 6 months for it to go through. As I mentioned before, Cyprus is about 6 to 8 months, and Malta is going to be about 18 months. So if someone's, for whatever reason has a time-sensitive matter, then the Caribbean, would be the logical one. We've even got a program in the South Pacific in a small island nation called Vanuatu, which has also been attractive for some people. So, this concept of economic citizenship is continually growing. And I think, for a lot of smaller countries, they see their sovereignty as being an asset that people would be willing to purchase. And so, they're structuring different programs. We saw Montenegro in Eastern Europe launch their program last year, which is, sort of stopped and started, to come out of the gates. But their pitch, if you like, is, we're going to ascend to the European Union by 2025. So why don't you invest in us now while the prices are lower and hedge your bets that we'll be a European country, in the next 4 or 5 years. And, we're going to see more of these programs evolve. A big thing of what I do is I work on our government advisory team here at Latitude. And so we're speaking, during COVID, we've spoken to over a dozen countries who are looking to either, tweak their existing program or start one from scratch so they can benefit from this ever-growing market.
So the last thing here, too, is and I really appreciate that. It's amazing how brilliant you are. You've been doing this for 25 years and answered every question seamlessly, which is, this is a subject that I'm sure a lot of people, the average folks, really don't talk about, but it's a direct indication. And that's the point of this podcast, where you want to see, what's going on with the economy. If more people it seems like that this is more like a precursor to how there are a lot of wealthy people that may look to move out of the U.S. or at least get that dual citizenship. So I guess the last question to you is, I saw on an industry site that demand was up 40% year over year. I don't know if they would talk about that site. Is it up even more than that? We're seeing like incredible demand. Put in perspective, I asked you earlier, but is this like the greatest demand that you've seen since you've been doing this, or is it just, hey, business is pretty good right now?
Yeah, if you're referring to people renouncing the U.S. citizenship, that number is, maybe 5,000 or 6,000, maybe, certainly not north of 10 per year that would do this, because it's a pretty involved process that you have to go through. And, many people, once, for whatever reason, they will say, okay, I'm done with the U.S., I'm going to renounce. They'll say that to get some publicity and then don't actually follow through and do it. We see that usually around an election or around, other events that might happen. So that's growing, but it's still not significant in terms of volume or scale. And, there are people who specialize in that and that's all they do. But no, in terms of the industry itself, as I mentioned before, we're seeing definitely a big spike, and that's for a variety of reasons, not just from the U.S. but also globally. Because this pandemic has really opened people's eyes and realized they're maybe not as prepared as they thought they were. And even having the almighty American passport in this current climate, it's not as strong as it used to be. Americans, I think, can get to about 86 countries now, without restriction, whereas in the normal times it would be 184. So, even the fact they can't even get to Canada, or to the European Union is a significant impact on people's ability to travel freely and enjoy the freedoms that are usually associated with being an American citizen. So it's, and as I mentioned before, if they did say, hey, I want to get out because of this, or I have a place in this country, I'm going to go and hunker down there during the next spike of the pandemic or whatever it is, if they don't have status, they're not going to be let in. And unfortunately, because of the way things are going in the U.S. with the pandemic, a lot of countries are not ready to open up their borders to Americans right now until it's really under control. As you know, there'll be a lot of different thresholds that have to be met for people to be granted access. And, I don't see that changing anytime soon because, it doesn't seem to be getting better quicker, in terms of not just in the U.S., but globally.
No, makes sense. So, Chris, if someone wants to get in touch with you, learn more about this, how could they do that?
Well, the best way is, my email is christopher.willis@latitudeworld.com. You can also go to our website, which is latitudeworld.com, and you can get all my contact details are there. But it also gives you a full breakdown of all the programs. We have a lot of videos. We have a lot of collateral on there, so you can do some research and see which program might be best for you. And then, then what we'll do is we'll just arrange a consultation, understand the needs, and then we can start seeing which programs could be best suited for somebody.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, give us a knowledge about this industry that few people talk about. I really, really appreciate it, taking the time, and hopefully you join us again soon.
Yeah, Frank, my pleasure. Like I said, as you touched on, a lot of people don't know that these programs or this option even exists. So it's wonderful to be able to share a bit of what I do every day with you and your listeners, and and hopefully it'll generate some options for people who hadn't considered it.
Thank you very much for listening today. If you're interested in more information about second citizenship or residency, send us an email at info@latitudeworld.com or go to our website at www.latitudeworld.com. As well, don't forget to check our pages regularly for news and updates. Latitude, welcome to your world.